Flora Samuel is professor at the University of Reading School of Architecture and a specialist on social value and research in architecture. She wrote Why Architects Matter and was the first RIBA vice president for research. At the end of last year, she published a report on the impact of housing design and placemaking on social value and well-being in the pandemic. Flora, your report sets out the importance of the role of home, its design, and its setting in creating resilient communities. And so while better space standards, greater flexibility, and access to green space can be delivered in new developments, what are we going to do about all the existing homes that fail to meet these post-COVID criteria?
Yes, well, good point. I mean, we have an absolute crisis in general around retrofitting. Certainly in Wales, where I live, even retrofitting to get the correct levels of environmental performance, or even a mildly better environmental performance, would be a huge challenge. So let alone retrofitting our existing neighbourhoods to fit the bill. But it's interesting, the case of retrofitting, because that has to be done as a sort of in order to make that effective, it needs to be done as a kind of community group with a lot of people buying into making it happen. That reduces the cost of it. And it does make me think in terms of making small adjustments to our existing housing stock, whether it's actually the development of community groups or associations to collaborate on making the best use of resources isn't the way forward. It makes the best use of retrofitting money and effort. So presumably it would do the same thing with regard to our existing housing stock. I mean, in all of this, it's all about leadership and empowerment. We have got enough resources to hand if only people felt able to actually do things in their neighbourhood. So the fundamental thing, which I think comes through in all the work we've done in the UK Collaborative Centre for Housing Evidence around design value, is we have to fundamentally empower the local authority planners to champion placemaking at the very top of local authorities. But within that, we have to empower communities too.
Yes, well, you talk about local authorities as agile and flexible organisations, perhaps compared to more lumbering central government. And yeah, you also refer to the Preston model of community wealth building, and their pandemic response builds on existing efforts to develop local supply chains and ensure that local public money is invested in local jobs. Do you see more local authorities following Preston's example?
Well, the reason that I came across Preston was through discussions with other local authorities. We've been interviewing a lot of planners, people, supply chains and so on. And so various other councils have been mentioned in the mix, people like North Ayrshire, in London, Islington, Newham. I know various good, responsible, good architectural practices are doing projects with those boroughs. Also, the Welsh Assembly has been cited as an example of good practice. So I think that there are emergent and shining examples of this, but it's really very difficult for them when they are so hampered by central government strictures and lack of funding.
But the report also includes a warning about sort of hasty changes of planning system, which we've seen in England. And you mentioned as a shining example, the Welsh Government's Building Better Places report, which looks at the role of the planning system in sustainable recovery. What is it that the Welsh Government is getting right that MHCLG is missing out on?
Well, the Welsh Government has been spending years putting together a kind of joined up planning philosophy, in which homes cease to be a commodity as they are seen to be treated in England, and are treated as a public good, a social public good. And so this all really builds on one particularly stunning piece of legislation, which is the Future Generations Act in Wales, which includes the what we do for the future generations in the mix. And what we do for the future generations is what we do for people, is also good for people now. So they have been working for several years on developing a good policy base on this. Now, my research in I did some very in-depth research around Bridgend with local planners, and it hasn't really started to impact. There's some very interesting test cases which the planners are starting to actually say, no, you can't build this housing development very cheaply in this terrible place with no transportation and no jobs. And so this is at the point of doing test cases and so on. But the Welsh Government, at a strategic political level, there's a tremendous amount of political will to make sure that the Building Places report, which works hand in hand with the local national development framework, that this all happens. And within that, there are a whole series of outcomes. Well, not a whole series, it's quite simple and straightforward, and I commend you to look at them. Things like maximising environmental protection, accessible and healthy environments, best use of resources, and creating sustainable communities. And that's, so in Wales, they're going beyond just mitigating impact on the environment, but actually talking about how you can improve the environment. And I'm quite excited that, for example, in Wales with Brexit, now they're thinking very intelligently about how you, now that the farm subsidies are going to stop, and if you have read the work of George Monbiot, you will be very aware that sheep are our sort of plague for the natural environment, for flooding and biodiversity and so many other things. That actually, they're even looking at rewilding quite a lot of the Welsh landscape, and to repurpose farming and to support farmers through that transition. So I think it's very exciting. So many people that I interviewed when we were doing the report in England were very, very worried that the government was going to do knee-jerk things, free up planning at a very random way in order to facilitate more building potentially in all the worst places and for all the worst reasons, which future generate a sort of a scourge on future generations, actually, as we put together the bad planning that's being put in place. So yes, fundamentally, I think Wales is taking a much more long-term view. Unfortunately, they don't have the resources and the money to carry it through, but they're really doing the best.
Good. Well, I must read up more about that.
Yes.
But the pandemic has highlighted the need to align healthcare systems with the planning systems. I mean, for example, through the provision of more active travel and the infrastructure to go with it. So if we're going to deliver the sort of long-term health benefits for all, how should we deliver that? I mean, the NHS has its pilot of 10 healthy new towns, which is very creditable, but we also need a programme for healthy old towns now, don't we?
Well, absolutely. And it links to your earlier question about how we retrofit our existing neighbourhoods for the future. I mean, fundamentally, it comes, the more I've been thinking a lot about this recently, and I think the quick fix, there is a quick fix. And David Attenborough would agree with me on this, I think. And the quick fix is that we all move to a plant-based diet. If we move to a plant-based diet, we immediately free up a lot of land, potentially for building homes. We reduce pressure on the National Health Service through chronic diseases which are associated with poor diet. And we can start to do a push by stopping subsidizing the meat industries and the dairy industries and these very destructive industries. We can start developing local food and local food production. You know, so we've famous examples like Incredible Edible in Todmorden. Not only do they provide local food, they provide an awful lot of local social infrastructure and bringing people together, opportunities for exercise for older people, for younger people, community interactions of all sorts of positive levels. So more and more, I think it's all hinges around food and food production. And I think this is really key. The really worrying thing is the way that planning and health don't talk together. And my report really showed that doctors just aren't interested because they're so busy coping. They aren't interested in looking at the health potential of the built environment. And then there's also other issues which play into the way that the government measures outcomes. So it looks very politically good to say we built 8 mega hospitals. It doesn't look so good to say we built 300 positive local small interventions that actually enabled people to access healthcare, healthy living, healthy learning in their neighborhoods. So I think we have to, this is where I'm so enthusiastic about social value, because it starts to capture this holistic story. Value is not just about money, it's also about these other kinds of forms of value to do with health, well-being, activity, and positive connection with one another.
So as I said in the introduction, you wrote a book called Why Architects Matter. So what should they be doing, or what should they be focusing on right now to help build back better in the way you describe, apart from all changing their diet?
Well, wouldn't that be nice? Well, they really, what I argue in the book is that really architects are not, that people don't know actually what works. So a really fundamental thing is to be doing post-occupancy evaluation of some sort. It doesn't have to be fancy, could be around one simple question around your projects. So doing post-occupancy evaluation, developing data about what works and where it works would be a very good start. And this also plays into demonstrating value to policymakers and others, because we have to make the value of architects easily translatable into policy. So this is where I think is an extreme opportunity for social value, because architects, I think, generate an enormous amount of social value. And then we have current initiatives happening like the Procuring for Value report, which is leading into the value work by the Construction Innovation Hub at the moment, which is developing a digital platform for future procurement, which is looking holistically at the whole raft of different kinds of value, not just money, and also thinking about the value of the project as it's built, but also the long-term value of a project in use. So I think a sensible thing for architecture practices, and I go around doing CPD sessions, a lot of practices talk about this, is to get your evidence and data ducks in order, really, and go back and find out what works, so that you can feed into these increasingly digital processes. And indeed, digital, whether architects like it or not, digital processes will be used to capture impact of projects anyway, through tracking social media, etc., and other kinds of innovation. And I think that what I say in the book is a lot of more innovative architects are getting really very wise to these kind of potentials, and actually becoming more focused in what they deliver, and are really focusing on data gathering and improving their offer.
Well, when you were Vice President for Research at the RIBA, you got the RIBA really to focus on the idea of delivering more post-occupancy studies. I mean, is that happening? And in the way you suggest, this is something that architects need to take the responsibility for, rather than just saying, who pays, why should we do it?
Absolutely. Well, I think RIBA recently published another report on post-occupancy using a lot of the material that we developed. So I'm hoping that, I have nothing to do with the RIBA anymore, but I'm hoping that the work continues. And I see an absolute swell of interest in post-occupancy from what I see as innovative practices. Quite honestly, I think it goes in line with the fact that this new drive on professional standards, professional knowledge, the RIBA's commitment to ethics, sustainable development, and the new code of conduct. that architects are going to have to demonstrate really much more clearly what it is that they do and why what they do is better. So there's a whole set of things that are putting pressure on architects to do their job a lot better, and this is hurting. And you see on social media, it's really hurting some practices. But the fact of the matter, to be an architect is to have custody of a professional body of knowledge. And the reason we have architects are so poorly paid, I would argue, is because they have not really taken they haven't really taken control of the body of knowledge and shown its value in a sensible way. So there's a raft of things that are coming together. Another thing that I think is going to really contribute to this is insurance. A lot of architects are absolutely melting all of a sudden because the cost of professional indemnity insurance is going through the roof. And I believe that the future, working with digital tools like the new Construction Innovation Hub Procuring for Value tool, is going to be around shared integrated project insurance, where the team has to work together on that. And I can't really see how it can continue in this individualistic way. And bearing in mind also that insurance more widely is increasingly being fed with data about performance, which is another reason why we need to gather good evidence about performance. So in a world where insurance is shared, hopefully a world it will be shared that we have teams will have to, as a team, demonstrate the performance of their buildings and places that they deliver. Well, they will have to, because they will have to feed that into outcomes-based procurement and bidding for future projects. So I think there's a whole sort of perfect storm of things coming forward that to promote post-occupancy evaluation and data gathering. And I do think there will be casualties and there will be firms that go under. And I think this is finally the moment when firms who have been taking this very seriously for a long time, and there are some extraordinary firms like for Archetype, always my sort of shining example, AHMM, Hawkins Brown, firms like that who've taken this very seriously will then be in peak position to take advantage of some business opportunity that comes through this zone. We're going to have so much. It comes in a way back to your questions, Peter, about how we're going to make better use of existing places and cities. We have so few resources, so we'll have to use them in a far more intelligent way.
And that's going to become even more critical as we build ourselves out of the pandemic and all the issues that's created for the built environment. So, Flora, thank you very much for your insights, and thank you for joining me today.
Pleasure. Thank you very much, Peter.